All right, so thank you all. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Hope you all had a good dinner, or you could just be eating right now as well. First of all, big thanks to the I Appreciate team for having me on board. And really, I'm just here to share some tips on how we can go about navigating the world of pandemic travel. So I'm pretty sure some of you have probably already traveled. So what I'm about to talk about, you can probably resonate with. But perhaps many of you are in the midst of planning that long-awaited escape after over 2 years of being grounded. So my goal today is to give you a little inside look into our pandemic travel survival guide. So just to give you a little glance as to what we'll be covering today. First of all, I'll talk a little bit about who we are, a bit about Blue Sky Escapes and what we're about. And then we'll go through, set a bit of a context on how we came up with the Survivalist guide. So I would share a personal encounter that I had on the road, and that will give you context of the tips and tricks that I'll be sharing in this webinar. And then we'll get into where and what. How can you go about picking a destination to visit, a hotel to stay in, and where to eat? And of course, being on the road, how can you stay safe? How can you self-regulate and stay connected as you go about exploring? And then finally, the exciting bit, I'll share some of our top picks in terms of destinations that you can get exploring right away. Also some juicy exclusives, that we have just for I Appreciate members and those of you who have joined for this webinar today. Okay. So a bit about Blue Sky Escapes. So I have a bit of video in this presentation, but you'll see that, it might be a bit laggy because of Zoom. It'll give you a feel. So thanks Li Ting for the introduction, but Blue Sky Escapes, I just wanted to share a little bit more. I'll say our passion really lies in helping travelers, get under the skin of the destination. We like to get our travelers close to local communities, having rich and authentic encounters, which are hard to access or come by. So to paint a picture and to share a bit of a story, if you look at this photo on the left, this was taken of a semi-nomadic yak herding couple. I met them in Bhutan, and this was when we visited a few years back. So they're actually located in this village called Laya Village. It's one of the most remote villages in Bhutan, receives very few visitors in a year. So the women in this village, they're known to have multiple husbands. So they practice polygamy, and they wear these iconic bamboo hats. So you see in this photo here, it's shaped like an antenna. Apparently, it's meant to strengthen the connection to the gods above. But what's really interesting about this village is that they're also, even though they're one of the most remote, they're also the richest village in all of Bhutan. And that's because in this part of the Bhutanese Himalayas, the cordyceps are available. So they actually make a lot of money picking cordyceps in the high mountains, and then they trade it in the markets. So it's really interesting that the richest, but yet, they live so minimally and they're so happy. So these are some of the stories that we like our travelers to uncover when they go on journeys with us. Okay, so now I just want to paint a little picture as to the background to this webinar. Okay, I will play this clip later on. Let me just flash some of these first. So of course, running a travel and lifestyle company, when my partner and I, Shervin, who's also in this webinar, so we set out in August last year on a 2-month-long trip to Europe. And we really just needed to see for ourselves what travel the new normal looked like. So no details were open yet. We covered 7 destinations: London, many parts of Scandinavia like Sweden, Denmark, Finland, the Faroes, Germany as well. And we braved like a whole bunch of nose probing. We traveled via all forms of transportation, whether it was by boat, by plane, train, underground, overground, self-driven, private car as well. And later on, we also spent a few weeks in Australia when, this was in January this year, at a time when Omicron cases were really surging. So over this period, it was about 2 to 3 months of travel. We met with partners, we stayed at various accommodations, and were inspecting rooms. And this is something that we have to do for our clients. So all in all, I'll say that we stayed in and inspected over 40 hotels and properties. So every few days we were shifting. It was really quite tiresome. But all in all, thank goodness, no, we did not catch COVID. So what I will be sharing today is, hopefully a useful little survivalist guide on how to navigate the world of pandemic travel. I think more importantly, and I've written here as well, moving from fear to abundance. I think it's important that there's no denying, the immense opportunities for inspiration that are had when we're on the road exploring, when we're being dazzled in an unfamiliar environment or stepping outside of our comfort zones. So I'm here also to tell you guys, traveling right now is completely doable. Don't be afraid. And I just want to encourage you all to just go. So, life doesn't wait. Life is now. Even if you look at the situation in Singapore, in spite of Omicron cases surging, something like 25,000 just today. The government is still pushing for a reopening, the expansion of the VTLs. So I think it's finally time that we're moving towards a normalization of this thing. Yeah. So I'm just going to play a little clip here for you guys. I hope you guys were able to catch that. I don't know how laggy that was, but basically this is us having a walkabout in Copenhagen. And this was a few days after they declared Freedom Day back in September last year. And that was the lifting of all COVID-related restrictions in terms of the nationwide restrictions. And you can really see, people were enjoying the last of summer, the little cheering here and there, and parties erupting in different corners. People are traveling, people are enjoying, people are out and about. And I'll say in terms of Asia, it's very apparent that we are definitely lagging behind in terms of exploring the world again. So for those of you who have started planning, you'll see, you might have seen already actually that availability, especially in Europe, has been quite limited because the rest of the world has gone right ahead. They've already been traveling full swing for a while, and really we're just playing catch up. So definitely something to think about. It's always important to plan ahead months in advance. And I suppose, it would be good to hear from some of you guys later on, some of these images that I have here on this slide, lots of crowds. They may strike up different sensations for some of you. If you see such large crowds heading towards you, what do you do? How do you feel? How do you stay safe? How do you self-regulate? So I'll be touching upon that in the slides that follow. Okay. Okay, so you've decided you're going to get out and you want to travel. And now, where do you go? So first of all, it's important that you look at the Safe Travel website as the authority. This is the Singapore one. It does look quite confusing if you go to the tables and all that, but they do have a very nifty and handy self-assessment tool. So if you see the screenshot on the right, it's really useful because you just punch in, where you're heading, what your vaccination status is, and if you're a Singapore citizen, that sort of thing. The first thing you want to know is whether you can return back. Of course, it's these graphics, like the one in the middle, that gets sent around on WhatsApp quite often. You want to make sure you have the right one, you have the most updated one. This one that I've included here is as of 22nd of Feb. So you can see in the general travel category, a whole bunch of countries, VTLs, have been opened up. Places like Australia, Denmark, Finland, Sri Lanka, Sweden, and upcoming VTLs as well from 25th of February. You've got Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, Israel. So, but even if it's not a VTL country and it's open to Singapore, but not a non-VTL country, of course you can go there. But what you could do is then perhaps transit, either you return home and you serve a 7-day SHN, along with the tests that are indicated over here. Or you could also transit through a BTL country, but that means that you have to spend 7 days in that BTL country before you return. So say you wanted to go to South Africa or to South America, do a big trip there, then that means you have to maybe either come home and do a 7-day SHN, or you can just transit in Thailand, for example, maybe decompress and do a bit of a vacation before you return to Singapore. So yes, the first thing you want to check is whether you can return home to Singapore and how you want to go about that. Second, you see the second bullet point is entry restrictions to the destination. Just because we have a VTL established does not mean that they're accepting Singaporeans. This is really important to note. So for example, Italy is not accepting Singaporeans at the moment, something that we're visiting in the mid of March. So Sherpa is a useful website that is a guide to helping you understand the up-to-date travel requirements. Similarly, there's a self-assessment tool. You can punch in where you're traveling from, where you're headed, and also a date range. So it's good to get an understanding quickly. But of course, you should also check against like the relevant embassy or any COVID designated website that's been set up by that destination, as it will have the most fully up-to-date information for you. And of course, visa requirements, that's a given. And the fourth one, in terms of vaccination status, you do want to check with Sherpa would give you an indication, but yeah, you want to check if that your vaccinations are up to date and that basically whatever you got is accepted in the destination you're traveling to. For example, I got Sinovac, and so currently I can't actually travel to France or Germany, and it's just something to bear in mind. Okay. So on this slide, I'm sharing with you some additional information you might want to take into account when deciding which destinations to travel to. So when I embarked on that 2 to 3 month long journey with my partner, there were no VTLs open. And so we had to rely on online sources. So for example, like Bloomberg was a really good resource. So Bloomberg has a COVID resilience ranking, which is really useful because it's like a monthly snapshot of where the virus is being handled most effectively, but with the least social and economic upheaval. So that means that even though you have very little cases, what is the quality of life of people there? Are their movements restricted? How quickly have they moved on? And that actually plays into the ranking. So there's no point, even though it's COVID 0, but you go there and it's like, you can't go to restaurants or it's groups of 2. So what they do is they draw on like 12 data indicators, things like virus containment, the healthcare quality, vaccination coverage, also how quickly they're progressing towards restarting travel. So it's a very useful source. So if you look at, I just screenshot it here, what is the most recent in this month? And you'll see that actually the top 12, you do see quite a bit of Scandinavia in there. You have Norway, you have Finland. That's also why we picked to go to those destinations back in August. And we figured that if Singapore is going to open any VTLs to any destinations, it would be probably destinations that are are high up on this COVID resilience ranking by Bloomberg. So yeah, so that's a handy tip for you. Another one you might want to look at is vaccination rates on Reuters. They do this tracking very well. But something that you can also glean from Bloomberg. So if there's only one website you want to look at, I'll suggest the Bloomberg one. Okay, so you've picked your destination and now you're deciding, okay, which hotels do I stay in? Which restaurants do I go to? Usually the first thing you want to do is, of course, go to their websites, have a look at the health and safety protocols. It's always good to research this, and it's published on their website. So usually they will also cover things like mask policies or if there's a requirement for vaccination status from guests. And it differs destination to destination. In Germany, for example, you see that mask wearing within restaurants and hotels, it's really quite strict. Whereas you won't really see this in other parts of Europe. London, for example, or even Scandinavia, a lot of these places, there were no masks at all. So I do have this point here in the third column on self-regulating, because the world of pandemic travel is such that, when I was entering when I was first doing this trip, I thought that, okay, everything's going to be so sterile and clean and everything's going to be, all the hotels would have evolved to really put all these measures in place. Yes, you do see that, especially for the high-end five-star hotels, but a majority of them have just moved on, and they no longer see, I think this is the most important point to make, they no longer see the virus as a threat. So it's really about us, coming out of our bubble and then entering this new world and acknowledging and accepting that and being okay with it, but self-regulating, of course. So I would say the third column is important in that, of course, you might be alarmed if you see crowds. You also be alarmed to see that buffets have returned. We thought that they were gone forever, but no, when we were traveling, they were very much alive and back. So, of course, if you can do your own checks before you dine somewhere. For me, I usually do a Google search. I'll look at the layout of the restaurant. I'll see if they have alfresco options. I'll see the spacings between the tables, that sort of thing. And then in hotels, if I see the huge crowds, or say, for example, there is a large crowd that's entering a lift, for example, maybe you want to wait for the next lift, or you want to just wear a mask. And there's certainly no flag for wearing a mask. Of course, you do see it mostly with Asians, but really, I mean, this is your safety, and people accept that, we do live in a very different environment right now, a very different world. So it's perfectly fine if you feel better wearing a mask. Another way is to also check out online reviews. So that's the last point in the first column I was going to make. That gives you an accurate and up-to-date reflection of what people have been experiencing, whether these establishments. So here are just some tips for you. Yep. Moving on to, now you're on the road, and how do you stay safe? So these are really just some practical tips and suggestions. Some of it's probably quite commonsensical. We live in a very clean city. Over here, I've just shared what's typically in my bag. Of course, you've got sanitizer, cleansing wipes. And when I talk about sanitizer spray, this is something that is peculiar for travel. So if, say, I'm going to be on a train ride, and it's going to be a long train ride, normally I have a spray is a natural disinfectant, and I spray it for the surrounding air. So it just disinfects the air. So that's something I like to do. Also, extra masks are important, of course, just in case, you lose it along the way when you're out doing shopping, that sort of thing. You also want to make sure that in the destination that you're visiting, that they don't have certain mask requirements. Like in Germany, for example, they strictly require N95. Public transportation, always ensure you've got good air ventilation to the extent that you can. You could, when you're entering a taxi, for example, you could be winding down the windows if possible. Also, you can opt for, in certain destinations, there are apps, or Uber, or a Bolt in London, for example. You can actually opt for COVID-safe vehicles. So if you look at the picture in the top left, this has a barrier in the taxi. So in some destinations like Germany, it's everywhere. All public transport has this. But in other destinations, it's only if you request for it on the app. And sometimes, that means you might have to wait a bit longer, or you have to pay a surcharge. So just bear that in mind. If you don't get a taxi with this, don't be afraid. It doesn't mean you can't enter. Of course, you can just self-regulate again and open the windows, wear your mask. Or you can, of course, which is something I like to do, self-drive, or have a private transfer, with with a driver that has been arranged by, say, a travel specialist and has been vetted. And then that way you can just, keep your mask off, that sort of thing, and be comfortable. So in terms of good practices as well, of course, the usual stuff would apply. I don't think I need to go through that, just sanitizing surfaces. Yep. Okay. I've also got a point here about mindful cleanliness. So this is really, you'll see this in most manuals. If you're going to be on the plane for many hours, going to be on the train, or whether in a hotel room, what you want to do is, of course, maybe use your disinfectant wipes or spray and just sanitize those high touch surfaces, whether it's buttons or handles, light switches. That's something I always do whenever I enter a new hotel room. And of course, if you've been out the whole day and you go back to your room, ideally you want to, practice good hygiene and take a shower once you get in. But of course, I would say, please, don't sit on your bed or don't sit in communal areas where you're going to be chilling in your clean PJs, that sort of thing. Maybe you want to designate like a specific seat just for you to sit in your outside clothes. But ideally, you want to just take it off and get it washed and take a shower. But another tip I have as well is what we were doing, because we were traveling for so long. And of course, when you're staying in multiple hotels, you don't want to be chalking up like a huge bill for laundry. And of course, when you're doing laundry, it's very expensive at these hotels. So what I did was, and this is a great tip as well from a doctor, which is to ask that they bring you a steam iron. So the great thing about steam irons is that the steam kills the bacteria. So of course, sometimes if it's like winter, for example, and you're wearing a coat or a sweater that you've only worn it once. So of course you're not going to wash it. So you just want to steam iron the exterior of the coat. And then usually I will just spray it down with a sanitizer spray, like a natural disinfectant. And then I leave it to be well ventilated somewhere. So this is, of course, on the go, you can look for laundry mats and they can usually do it for much cheaper. So this way you can save on the laundry bill. Yeah. Okay. Next slide here. I'm going to talk a little bit about really looking to supplementation and nourishment while you're on the road. So you see here that I have a whole list of vitamins, and these were vitamins that we took along with us and as recommended by a biochemist. And this is really actually a protocol by FLCC. So if you look at it online, you can also find the dosage amounts, zinc, vitamin D. This is all known to fight COVID actively. So for so people who have actually caught the bug, these are actually things, supplements they're already using. Sodium ascorbate, quercetin. I always make sure to get quercetin with bromelain. Bromelain is actually from the pineapple enzyme, which is widely discussed in the holistic plant remedy community. Apparently what it does is that it breaks the link between the virus and your cells. So bromelain is really good to also fight off the virus. NAC. So please do note that for all supplements, of course, clear any of these with a medical practitioner if you're taking any other personal meds in combination, or if you're pregnant. So these are just recommendations here. And of course, overall nutrition. I think we're all guilty of this. Like it's so easy to just, plan that holiday, and when you're on it, you just fall off, the bandwagon in terms of your own exercise regime, and your routine. And that's something that I'm very guilty of. So every time I travel, I always make sure that every few days, we fit in some hikes or something active, or we fit in some jogging, in the mornings. I also bring with me like a yoga mat towel. So at least I can practice in the morning, do some stretching, or in the evenings. So it's always important to, keep active and get the blood circulating during your trip. So that combined, of course, with good and healthy, balanced eating habits. I also have here a recommendation on water. Hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. So if you look at the top right, that over there is called the Travel Berkey. And I highly recommend this when you travel. It's basically a water purifier and is used by UNICEF. And if you actually pour swimming pool water at the top of it, it would purify into drinking water in the bottom chamber. So this is really nifty to have with you on the go. This way you are not wasting money by having to buy plastic water bottles or mineral water on the go. And you're always ensuring that you actually realize that you're always dehydrated when you're traveling, because we have to buy water or we just drink water when we're at restaurants. So the Travel Berkey is a great way to ensure that you're always drinking, you're always hydrating. And also it helps you save a ton of money, and it's also more sustainable. If you're looking for it, Water for Life is a good place. It's a supplier in Singapore. Also, testing as you go. This is really important because I think especially, if you're going to be doing all those pre-departure tests, if you're moving between destinations, pre-departure tests, and I'll get to this later, usually they're PCR tests, and they tend to be very expensive. They can be hundreds of dollars, but maybe you want to prepare yourself before you do that PCR test, and by doing an ART first. That way, you can just prepare and you can plan ahead and make any adjustments to your travel plans. So if you want to, so that's why I say here it's important to also feel into your body each day. For me, for example, I regulate my own body temperature. I use the Aura Ring, so it's something that I'm actually wearing right now. It's actually the most advanced piece of wearable technology, and it tracks my body temperature as I sleep. Apart from sleep, it also tracks sleep patterns. So when it tells me my temperature is rising, it helps me to predict if I'm about to fall ill. And actually, we did fall ill once over our trip, and it's something to consider, that really we've been in this bubble over here in Singapore. We've been wearing masks everywhere. So the moment you take them off overseas, you really become susceptible to whatever else is in the air. So having something that can track your temperature, track your temperature and all that, that would be really useful just so you can plan ahead. Okay. All right, so this over here, I'm just going to share very quickly, just looking at the time as well. Being prepared, of course, we've got travel insurance. Right now, this is actually a requirement for entry into many destinations. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that. And sometimes you need to also have a minimum sum. It needs to be able to cover COVID-related issues, whether it's like medical treatment, hospitalization costs. General travel insurance as well is important in case of flight cancellations, trip cancellations. You can also get certain travel insurance out that covers overseas quarantine allowance. Yeah, and then when you're in your destination, do of course ensure that you have the right contact tracing app to download, something you can easily find on the embassy website. Also, you would consider having expert support. So this is something that we always give to all our clients that travel with us, is 24/7 emergency ground support. So 24/7, we have a WhatsApp hotline. If anything happens, we're there to switch or change bookings or to react. So of course, more importantly, when you're making your booking, make sure that everything's flexible just so you can deal with the uncertainties of COVID-19. Also budgeting. I mentioned before some PCR tests. In Europe, in some destinations can be really expensive. In Scandinavia, for example, like in Sweden, it was like a couple of $100s. So I would say that in the world of pandemic travel, you do have to accommodate a higher budget. You might need extra luggage space as well, because you might be bringing with you extra stuff, whether it's like supplements or test kits, the travel burkey. Yeah, so just be aware that it would cost a bit more. Right, so staying connected, of course, very important when it comes to internet access. Of course, a lot of us want to go on that digital detox, but just make sure you've got your data bundle sorted, before you travel, just in case you need to keep track of local news and how things are emerging, something important in this day and age. And also given that we're still not out of the woods, having hard copies is extremely important of your travel documentation, and also things like your vaccination status, or arrival cards, that sort of thing. So if you're staying at any hotels and you need to print out any documentation, you can just get the concierge to do it. Also, you can register your trip with MFA, which would be a really good thing to do just in case they need to reach out to you for any emergencies. So that is all from me. So we've reached the end of the webinar. And so this is a little slide here if you'd like to stay in touch. So here are some ways that you can do so. So I hope that, so I guess overall, I'm here to say that, traveling now is completely doable. And I just want to encourage all of you to go. Life doesn't wait. Life is now. Get out, get exploring, enjoy, and experience life richly. And of course, I wish you all safe journeys ahead.